Hey guys, and for all the new subscribers, I appreciate you subscribing to me and supporting me. Regrettably, for some of you, my channel won't be solely about Scientology. I'm also a politics guy, ran for office myself once upon a time, and certainly have some experience in that. So we'll do a few palate cleansers, this time talking about Liz Cheney's likely entry into the presidential 2024 race. Later, I think, as another good palate cleanser, I'm going to do some movie reviews. I've been going to movies. I like to go to the movie theater a lot. So some interesting stuff, and of course, we'll have more Scientology content as well. But wanted to start with the big news that it looks like Liz Cheney, former congresswoman from Wyoming and essentially establishment Republican and neoconservative Republican, looks almost certain to throw her hat in the ring under the No Labels Party, the newly created No Labels Party in the presidential race. It's interesting because Trump seemed to essentially goad her. She released this new book that obviously detailed January 6th and was very critical of the former president. So on Truth Social, Trump wanted to address this, which essentially got Cheney to confirm or come close to confirming that she'll be running for president. So in some sense, former President Trump kind of started it. On his Truth Social page, as you can see, it says, "Crazy Liz Cheney, who suffers from Trump derangement syndrome at a level rarely seen before, writes in her boring new book that Kevin McCarthy said he came to Mar-a-Lago after the rigged election because the former president was depressed and not eating." The statement is not true. I was not depressed. I was angry. It was not that I was not eating. It was that I was eating too much. But that's not why Kevin McCarthy was there. He was at Mar-a-Lago to get my support and to bring the Republican Party together. Only good intentions. Liz Cheney, on the other hand, went on to lose her seat in Congress by the largest margin for a sitting congressperson in the history of the U.S., which might actually be true, interestingly enough. She then worked with others on the January 6th committee to delete and destroy the evidence of the findings of the committee. So Trump essentially, just in response to her book, came out with guns blazing. And this is something we kind of learn about Trump, whether you love him or hate him, is that he can often be his own worst enemy. So in response, Cheney went on this press tour, it appears, and she came very close to essentially saying that she is going to run for president.
You have not ruled out running for president yourself. Do you envision something where you run with the Democrat and do some kind of unity ticket?
I'm going to decide over the course of the next couple of months, and it will certainly depend upon where it looks like things are going with the nominations of both parties. But again, I think it's a moment where people have to be willing to put partisanship aside and say the future of the country demands that we save the republic, and we're never going to get the chance to debate all the other really important issues if we allow Donald Trump the power to unravel the very foundations of our Constitution.
Now, she would not be making those statements if she were not about to pull the trigger. And it's pretty obvious that Cheney had presidential interest from the very beginning. Think about 6 months ago, Cheney was releasing a bunch of ads against Trump within the state of New Hampshire. Now, a lot of people assumed that Cheney would run in the GOP primary herself, although obviously she'd have very little of a base. But it was clear that she enjoyed getting involved in the presidential and the electoral fray, and even back then was putting in signals that she was going to be involved in this race. So I would say at this point, it's a 90% likely chance that Liz Cheney will run. Now, will she get a lot of support? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is such an anti-establishment figure and has policies, especially in the vaccines, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, that is so different than the major party candidates that he is a niche to advocate and to campaign on. I would say probably same thing with Cornel West. He's so to the left on the Israel-Palestine issue, on minimum wage, and a number of other issues where people feel like Biden doesn't come left enough on, that he has a reason to essentially run for president. And Cheney, I think, less so. So I think Cheney will certainly not do as well as RFK. 3 polls in a row had RFK polling at about 18% nationally. And it looks like, because he's already hit 3 polls where he's polling above 15%, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will be in the debate. But Cheney is, of course, a very well-known figure. And there are a lot of establishment Republicans that are wary of Trump that might be pro-vaccine, so they wouldn't necessarily vote for RFK, or they wouldn't like RFK's progressive positions on a number of issues. Cheney might be the way to go. So I do suspect Cheney could probably get a respectable 4 to 5% of the vote. Cornel West is a very well-known figure. I think he could get 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 as well. Much more well-known than Ralph Nader was when he was running, for example. And it's interesting because people talk about this race as if it's Trump versus Biden, and with that, Trump is clearly dominating and is clearly expanding his lead against Biden, sometimes to as much as 7 points in a one-on-one matchup. But what the pundits are not realizing is this election is completely different than any other modern election, quite frankly, since 1996. 1996 was the last time there was a serious third-party candidate. That was Ross Perot in his second run under their foreign-party banner. He did a lot less impressively than he did in 1992, but I believe he still got an impressive enough, like 8% of the vote, something like that. But Ross Perot in 1996 was the last candidate to really poll above 3 to 4%. Robert F. Kennedy is polling 20%. Cornel West right now is polling as much as 10%. Liz Cheney could poll as much as 10%. And since RFK Jr. qualified to get in the debate with these 3 polls of him above 15%, RFK Jr. is most likely in that debate. Wouldn't be shocking if Cheney could somehow cobble enough support together to try to meet that threshold as well. But you can't really make any narration on this race because it's not Trump versus Biden, and you have to account for who I think are serious third-party candidates. It's Trump versus Biden versus Robert F. Kennedy Jr. versus Liz Cheney under the Noble Labels Party versus Cornel West versus Jill Stein, who got 1% of the vote last time. So she has some name recognition. She might get better than the 1% that she got against Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in 2016. She might get 2%. Of course, Cornel West has his own Herculean task. And as to whether or not Cheney is getting on the ballot on all 50 states, I would say at least 48 of them, that is quite likely to happen. The RFK campaign said they were spending, it would take about $5 to $10 million, that they'd spend that much money to get their candidate on the ballot. Now, remember, if you're not a Democrat or Republican, and sometimes Green and Libertarians have automatic ballot access, but oftentimes they don't, you have to petition from an X amount of voters in each state to get your name on the ballot. Sometimes, like in Texas, you have to get as many as 50,000 signatures from 50,000 different people. So RFK Jr. is doing that, and No Labels is also going to have to do that. But they said that they plan to spend $70 million on this effort. So 5 to 10 million will simply be a drop in the bucket. No Labels has been very secretive about how much they've actually raised and how much they actually have. But if you look at some of their donors, these guys are the big wigs, the big financiers of politics. Particularly one is the president, the CEO of the Lowe's Home Improvement Company. So obviously No Labels has the money, and they've been looking for a candidate, a very specific candidate, I would say a pro-business, pro-establishment, pro-continuing some corporate control and influence, but without the opposition or without the love of reflexive power like Trump has, and without some of the zanier positions, even on abortion, for example, that some of the GOP feels. So they're kind of the Chamber of Commerce, pro-business, Republican-light version of the Republican Party, the Mitt Romney style. Now, I would say that still very much qualifies as Republican. Some people say Cheney's a Republican in name only, but some could say that Cheney is a neoconservative classic Republican. That would still make a Republican. And in terms of who everybody gets votes for, one poll had Robert F. Kennedy Jr. taking slightly more away from Biden. They did a few matchups of Trump and Biden, with Trump about 7 points ahead, and then with RFK, he's only about 3 points ahead. But it looks like the polls have him essentially, in terms of peeling away votes, it's about 60% from Trump, 40% from Biden. So there are also a lot of progressives who would never vote for Trump, but feel like Biden has been incompetent on the economy and want to vote for RFK. So that's certainly a percentage. Cheney, on the other hand, I think Cheney, the reason she's doing this is to specifically help the Democrat win, because a lot of her votes will come directly from Trump. A lot of people who would have voted for Mitt Romney or who were the Chamber of Commerce Republicans who still think Biden is a disaster and would not want to vote for a Democrat, now finally they can vote for Liz Cheney, because RFK Jr., especially with the vaccine positions and his progressive stance in the environment, might be simply too zany for some of these people to vote for. So Liz Cheney's going to be a factor. Can she get in the debates? I doubt it. But my guess is she's going to start polling at least 8 to 9%. And I honestly think Biden has a great shot of winning with all these third party. Now, of course, Cornel West is a serious candidate as well. And he's certainly making his name known and his policies known by being more supportive of Palestine and the Israel-Palestine conflict, and that certainly is a niche. So he's a serious candidate. He's polling at 4% right now. He'll probably keep it because he's an impressive media figure. But yeah, this shows the dynamics of a whole new race. I would say, knowing presidential politics and just looking at what Cheney's saying, it's almost guaranteed that she is likely to win. And some other presidential news, the GOP has another candidate that has dropped out. That was another news. The GOP had a candidate that dropped out. That was North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. There was initially some promise with Burgum because he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He started this software tech company early on, and then became governor of North Dakota. And be an establishment North Dakota politician for the nomination kind of came out of nowhere. So interesting guy. He got comparisons that he looks like an eagle, but it appears that he is dropping out. So the question is, where will his support go to? And it looks like all these candidates are slowly dropping out. Tim Scott, of course, did so. Doug Burgum dropped out, obviously, because it appeared that he could not make the debate. He was able to make the previous two debates when you need to get a certain amount of donors to support you. And the polling threshold was much lower. That was 0.5 to 1%, which Burgum was polling at. Now I think it's about 3 to 4%. So each time the threshold gets higher, and Burgum obviously saw that he wasn't really catching on. He thought he could kind of be this libertarian, pro-business Republican that was actually a decent governor and knows a thing or two about economics. He probably would have been an interesting nominee. But he is out, but it'll be interesting to see where his support goes. With all these people dropping out, are they all going to drop like flies and endorse Nikki Haley before the New Hampshire primary? Right now, everybody's saying Trump has this 60%. He's ahead. He has 60% of the vote in the GOP primary. Haley is in second place with 20%. The lead is insurmountable. But if you actually look at the state polls, Trump is consistently under 50%. And remember, 50% is the magic number. If you're a candidate, whether it's a 2-person race or a 5-person race, if you're a candidate and you have above 50%, you could essentially rest easy if you're at 51. Think of that like that happens in a general election with third-party candidates. But if you're below 50% consistently, Trump in the state of New Hampshire has been at 40%, 42%, 45%, but never 51%. And Cheney keeps nipping at Haley keeps nipping at Trump's heels, I think, pretty significantly. Right now, she is still 25 points down behind Trump. But remember, a poll a month ago, she was 35 points. And during that same time, another poll had her 40 points down from Trump. So she's slightly closing that gap. And if the end result is Christie drops out, that's the big effort. A lot of backroom donors, the Koch brothers, who are multi-billionaires, have decided to endorse Haley. A lot of the backroom donors are trying to pressure Chris Christie to drop out. I think it's quite obvious that if Chris Christie dropped out, he would endorse Haley. Now think about this. Christie is doing impressive in New Hampshire as well. He's oftentimes polling third, beating DeSantis. Christie brings along with him in the New Hampshire poll specifically 10 to 12% of the vote. Now remember, Nikki Haley is about, at this point, 25 points down from Trump. So what if Christie drops out? That 12%, all of a sudden, Haley is not at 25% to Trump's 45%. She could be at 37% to Trump's 45%. And then they're still waiting on the Tim Scott endorsement. That will be a big one as well. I think Scott would be very likely to endorse Nikki Haley. Although, I say likely to endorse Haley to try to stop the opposition, but actually not. Tim Scott's going to be the big wild card. So ignore everything I just said. The reason is because Scott and Trump seem to have some sort of a friendship, and at least Scott tends to express some sort of admiration. Trump seems to express some sort of admiration for Tim Scott. For example, when he announced, he said he did a much better job than Ron DeSantis and welcomed him into the race, and essentially gave Tim Scott a compliment. Tim Scott very much wants to be Trump's running mate. Probably. That would be my guess. So he might not endorse Haley. He might look at the win, though, and see if his 4%, if the polls are that tight, and the 4% that he was getting might make the margin of error to achieve a victory for either Trump or Haley. That'll be very interesting. Now, will Tim Scott be chosen by Trump? He certainly is a very real contender. Trump would want somebody who comes off as kind and gracious to balance him out. Of course, the rumors of his hidden homosexuality, Tim Scott's hidden homosexuality, might bubble up. But I think in a general election, a lot less people care about that. And if somehow the Inquirer revealed that Tim Scott was gay, he could have this mea culpa moment and say, you know what, I'm coming out as a gay American. This is the general election. And voters might think, hey, the GOP is more progressive than we thought. Look at all the support of Tim Scott. So I think even being a closeted homosexual, even having some sort of revelation, even that he slept with some dude at some point, I actually think in a general election he won't really care. That nobody will really care. So if the opposition, if the Trump opposition research people find that, I don't think that's going to be a factor. So I think Tim Scott probably has a 30% chance of actually being chosen as Trump's nominee because he wants somebody who's loyal and somebody who's a person of color and somebody who's talented and somebody who's likable. So I think Kristi Noem is probably choice number one, but Scott is going to be interesting. If Scott gets some information that he won't be Trump's running mate, he might endorse Haley, or he might say, I think what this is likely, have me as a running mate, I'll endorse you. If not, I'm going for Haley. Because even the small candidates, even Burgum's endorsement, which carries 1% of the vote, will actually make a difference. So at this point, don't count Haley out. I think my final prediction for New Hampshire is Trump wins, but barely. He gets 55. It's a two-person field to this point. Haley gets 45. That's 55-45. Haley gets some decent enough momentum. She squeaks out a victory in South Carolina by a point or two. Then it goes on to Super Tuesday. I think that's where Trump totally crushes her. But I think this battle will go on at least until Super Tuesday. I will be in New Hampshire in about a week. Trump has a rally there. I was home for a while. I was in East Palestine, and so you'll see more footage of that as well. Then decided to come home. Mom had some health issues. Looks like she was having a stroke potentially, so I had to be on standby. She's good now. But had to take kind of 2 weeks to address that, and so I'm home now. But getting back on the road in New Hampshire, we'll also have some more Scientology stuff. I know that's my favorite. That's a favorite of everybody's. But everybody else who's watching this, please don't unsubscribe. I posted this last video expressing my support for Aaron, and I got a lot of support and a lot of new subscribers, and I appreciate that. But before that, I had lost 150 subscribers, and I didn't think the content that I was doing was that horrible. And if you're one of those people that unsubscribed, please explain why you unsubscribed. Maybe you just hate topics that are not Scientology. Maybe that's where I'm going wrong, that I have to have this one specific topic and everybody hates politics. Or maybe you hate me. I don't know. Or maybe you're on the left and you think I sound too right, or you're on the right and you think I sound too left. I consider myself more nonpartisan libertarian above anything else, but that might be the issue as well. But yeah, I lost like 100 subscribers. I'd like to find out why, because it just seems strange. But please don't unsubscribe. Please subscribe if you're watching this for the first time. But don't unsubscribe. Just let it float. If you don't like it, as long as you don't think I'm like this evil person, just let it float. It helps me. It hurts me when you unsubscribe. Please do not do that. Please subscribe. And if you hate everything that's non-Scientology, tell me and let me know. Because I was going to try to have a variety of things. I love politics. I was going to try to do some movie reviews because I've gone out to the movies quite a bit. And I used to do that when I was a local news anchor. But again, I promise you also some more Scientology stuff. So thank all of you guys for watching. And I appreciate the continued support and interest. You take care.